Okay, let's go ahead and get started. This is going to be part 2 of chapter 9. Um, sorry for me being in a different place than normal. That sun is killer this time of year, so this corner is much better for me. So last class we talked about interest groups. Today we're going to talk about lobbying, inside-outside strategies, and influence. One second. Sorry, I thought I had to sneeze. The big idea for today is that interest groups do not influence government in just one way. They choose among inside strategies like direct lobbying and testimony, and outside strategies like media pressure, grassroots mobilization, election activity, and ballot efforts. Which tools they use depends on their resources, membership, expertise, and the kind of fight they're in. So the three questions we had from, the three kind of things that I want you thinking about from last class. What is the collective action problem? And if you guys remember, that's that whenever we have collective action, there's kind of this balance between letting other people do it for you and having freeloaders. And the more people you have, the harder it is to like organize people and stuff like that, because the ideas are sort of different. Why are concentrated interests often easier to organize? There's usually smaller people. They usually have increased motivation, and there's typically already forms of communication in place. Think airline pilots versus airline passengers. Because the pilots are concentrated into one smaller group, it's a lot easier to mobilize them. And then what is the difference between a party and an interest group? Parties are giant coalitions that try to govern, whereas interest groups aren't really interested in governing, but are interested in achieving action on a particular thing. So last class was about why groups form. Today is about what they actually do once they're organized. So this first chunk is going to be about what lobbyists actually do. I want to start with this. Does anybody know where the term lobbying comes from? This is a really fun story. And by fun, I mean somewhat sad. I used to work at Grant's Farm in St. Louis, and that is, so I've heard this spiel a million times, although I never gave it myself, as I was an animal handler and in food service before that. But this term comes from Ulysses S. Grant, fantastic general, credited with winning the Civil War. Not so great president. Rumor has it that he was often intoxicated throughout his entire presidency. And if you wanted to get something done back in the day, one of the things you would do is you would go try to hang out with the president and talk to him about your things at the hotel bar across the street from the White House. So the term lobbyist comes from the people who would hang out in the bar waiting for Ulysses S. Grant. So fun story, kind of sad, because it definitely illustrates, some of the more colorful sides of the US presidency. Interestingly enough, who knows what's going to be said about our current administration or the past several administrations, but one of the funniest stories, which I've heard conflicting things about, is with Taft. Has anybody ever heard about Taft? Taft was a Supreme Court judge, was also president, but he's famous for being extremely large. So large, in fact, that the story goes that he once got stuck in a bathtub at the White House, and somebody had to help him out. So, fun presidential stories. The core point about lobbying is that lobbying is not just bribery or shady meetings. And I love how the notes from the book says it's not just, because rest assured, some of that does go on. But the book more frames it as lobbying is an effort to influence policy through contact with public officials, and much of it involves providing information, research, testimony, policy proposals, and strategic pressure. Groups also use expertise to explain how a policy would affect members, industries, or constituents. A lot of you guys are qualified enough to be representatives or senators in the state of Missouri, irrespective of age, right? We'll set that aside. If I come to you with a proposal to build a nuclear plant, how many of you have the expertise to say whether or not that's a good idea? I sure don't. You do?
No.
Part of the job of a lobbyist is to teach you about that. And they're going to do that through a variety of ways. First, they're going to come actually just talk to you. Second, they're going to present evidence at committee hearings for you to consider. But the point is that we don't expect our senators and representatives to be experts in everything. We do expect them to be good consumers and researchers of information. And that's one of the core functions that a lobbyist plays. Lobbyists do not just ask for favors, they often provide information, arguments, and ready-made policy solutions. I told you at the beginning of the semester I testified in favor of a bill that would allow Waymo to operate in the state of Missouri. The reason I was asked to testify for that, and the reason I gave that testimony, is because it would be a big impact for people with disabilities. Like, Uber's great and everything, Lyft is great and everything, but there's also a lot of stories of people who are deaf or hard of hearing being denied service because the driver doesn't feel comfortable with them. A robot doesn't care. A robot cares about whether or not you have the right things to get in the car, kind of thing. Why is this important? Well, most representatives and senators don't understand the unique position people with disabilities are in. And so if I can come and be like, hey, as a person who's blind and serving like on the Governor's Council on Disabilities and everything, it's something you may not have considered, but this is going to open up a whole new world of accessibility for us. Providing that kind of information is invaluable to the people who make our laws. I assume everybody in here, does anybody in here not drive like me? No? Okay. You don't drive? So if you wanted to go get groceries, how are you going to do that?
By bike or walking.
Yeah. And when I first came to town, there weren't as many bike paths. There was no Uber. You could get a taxi. There's Handy Wheels that is a paratransit, but there are massive problems with all these things. So frequently what we were doing, my wife can now drive, but frequently what we were doing is walking like the 2 miles to the grocery store and walking back, or she'd ride her bike there and back. But the problem with that is that completely changes the accessibility to services that people have. So when Uber became a thing, it was like life-changing for us. It's, oh my God, we can go do things like normal people. That's so cool. Since then, Uber's kind of let us all down because there's so few drivers and they charge so much. Very disappointed in how they've acted. And this is not my politics. It's that the big debate at the time was whether or not Uber would put out of business the taxi companies. And they did. And so now that Uber's like, but we'll never change our service. When Uber first came to town, if I wanted to go across town, I could get an Uber within like 3 to 5 minutes, and it would cost $5 to $10. The other day, it was storming, and I needed to get to my office, and Uber was going to be there in, within an hour, and it was $25 to go the 1.8 miles to my office. So bad Uber, if you're watching this YouTube video. Do better. All right, inside strategies. So we talked about how there's inside strategies and outside strategies. Let's define the difference clearly to begin with. What are inside strategies? These are tactics used through direct contact with elected officials, staff, or bureaucrats. In your book, it's going to highlight the direct lobbying, drafting legislation, offering testimony, providing research, and even litigation as examples. We often think about legislators writing legislation. They often don't. Frequently, the people who write the legislation are going to be either outside groups or like the Capitol has an entire drafting division, and their job is to actually write the laws. When it gets to drafting legislation, it gets kind of technical because the choice of word that you use might not seem like a big deal to you, but it is a massive deal when it comes to how we're going to interpret the law. For example, if we say students should turn all assignments in by the last day of class, or we say students shall turn all assignments in on the last day of class, what's the difference there?
Say should and shall?
Yeah.
Should is like you should like if you want to.
Yeah.
Or no, but yeah, that, but also like so like almost suggesting it, but it's not definite. Whereas shall means you will.
Yeah. And so, you know, people like lawyers fixate on those words that are used all the time. But most people think if I say, hey, everybody should turn their stuff in by the end of class, everybody knows that's kind of an instruction to do that. But when it comes to interpreting laws, this makes a big deal. Did we talk in here about the rule of leniency? Yeah. When it comes to mandates or crimes, we are going to be as lenient as possible. What does that mean? That means that if there's some sort of ambiguity, if there's some sort of, hey, this could go either way, we are always going to find it in favor of the person we're trying to enforce it against. Where does this come into play in practice? Well, the criminal code was forever basically classified stealing as a felony if a couple of different conditions are met. However, has everybody heard of the Oxford comma? An Oxford comma, you can do lists in a couple of different ways. You can say like bananas, comma, oranges, comma, and apples. However, the Oxford comma is if you say bananas, comma, oranges, comma, and apples. It's that comma before an and in a list. The statute for stealing, felony stealing, didn't have an Oxford comma, but throughout the legislation or throughout the statutes, there are Oxford commas everywhere. And so the Supreme Court, even though it decided years and years and years ago that this doesn't matter, reversed themselves a couple of years ago and said, oh, no, it does matter. And so this is the value of the property is only read in conjunction with this other thing. I don't remember what the other thing was because the law has since been changed. But all of a sudden it meant that stealing something that was valued more than $750 was no longer a felony. So it becomes really important that when we write legislation, we write it correctly and precisely. And so frequently, it's not the legislators who are actually writing this, it's groups who are saying, hey, this is the legislation that has worked everywhere else. Can you use this? Or a legislator who wants to do a particular thing will send it down to drafting to be like, hey, can you help me make this thing happen? Inside strategies work best when a group has access. They have to be able to get to the Capitol, talk to the representatives and senators. They have expertise. Again, this is a very technical thing. They have the relationships already established. There's credibility, and it's a narrow and specific policy ask. There are people over at the Capitol who testify about virtually everything. And some of them are trusted and some of them aren't. There's one guy who styles himself as the people's advocate or something like that, the public advocate. He has no credibility whatsoever because he is basically testifying on every single piece of legislation that comes up. And so it almost becomes a joke of what he has to say. But if we narrow it down, if we're, hey, we care about just this one thing, we're experts on just this one thing, it's more likely that we're going to be heard. Inside strategies include things like meeting with lawmakers, meeting with staff and bureaucrats. Again, when it comes to legislators, each of them are going to have their staff of people to help them with all the various functions they perform. a senator's not just sitting there answering all the phones, writing legislation, reviewing everything, and spending time in committee meetings and on the Senate floor and everything. They're going to have people that are doing a lot of that for them, and giving them summaries and stuff. So if you can get the staff on your side, it's a little bit easier to get the senators or representatives on your side. We talked about how they're going to draft bill language. They're going to provide data or policy briefs. They're going to testify at hearings, and they're going to sometimes pursue court action. Inside strategies are strongest when a group can say, we know this issue, we know this institution, and we can help you act. So what are outside strategies? Outside strategies try to influence government indirectly by shaping public pressure. The text points to grassroots emails, letters, phone calls, election activity, media attention, and initiatives, referenda as examples. When we talk about the initiative petition, a lot of times that is going to be an outside effort. It kind of seems like inside effort because there's going to be the drafting of legislation and things like that. But rather than trying to go to the legislature and say, hey, can you guys make this happen? A decision has been made that the legislature isn't going to do what we want to do. So we're going to go to the people directly. We're going to work with the institution, but on the outside. When we think about things like the legalization of marijuana, it's very evident that the legislature isn't going to move on that issue. And if, as a state, we really care about that, we really want it to happen, an initiative petition or working on the outside becomes the method that we get it done. So outside strategies work best when a group has members or supporters it can activate, a message that attracts media attention, a salient issue that ordinary people notice, and the ability to make elected officials worry about elections or public backlash. I would add, so this is at a federal level, because at the federal level, you have a right to petition the government, but you don't have a right to do like an initiative petition where you can change the laws group. At the state level, because we have that, I would add that to that list. And rest assured, legislators definitely worry about when groups come together and make things like this happen. The Missouri legislature, for example, keeps trying to mess with initiative petitions because they don't like the fact that the people can circumvent them to get done what they want to get done. All right, outside strategies include media campaigns, rallies and protests, grassroots calls and emails, campaign spending or endorsements, and initiative or referendum campaigns. Outside strategies say if we can't win quietly inside government, we will change the political environment around the decision. So I'm going to read a couple of different scenarios, and I want you guys to tell me, is this inside or outside, or some sort of mixed strategy, and why? So scenario 1, a professional medical association wants a technical reimbursement rule changed in a federal program. Should they try an inside strategy or an outside strategy? Don't everybody shout out at once. All right, I'm going to call on people then. How about you, sir?
Repeat the question.
You're going to tell me if they should use an inside or outside strategy, and it's a professional medical association wants a technical reimbursement rule changed in a federal program. What's going to be more likely to succeed here, inside or outside strategies?
I'd assume inside strategy.
Yeah. Do you know why?
No.
Well, take a stab at it. There's no wrong answer here. What do you think inside?
I'd assume that it's because it's people on the inside are creating it, so they know what's going on, versus like someone who doesn't really understand the process.
Yeah, so I'm going to refine your answer just a little bit. But that's essentially the big idea here, right? Because it's a professional association and they're focusing on a technical reimbursement rule, this is not something that's going to have broad public appeal. This is something that is going to work better if you go to the legislature and say, hey, I'm the expert on this. You guys should do this because of this. So that you're exactly right. It should be an inside strategy. And the reason for it is because they've got the expertise, they've got the access theoretically, and it's not something that's going to have broad public appeal. It's going to be more narrowly tailored to the technical side of things. All right, scenario 2. A public interest group wants to stop a highly visible environmental project. What do you guys think? Go on, you.
Outside,
Outside? Why do you think outside?
because it's just like a public group of people instead of like a specific group.
I think this might be able to be mixed. You might be able to have people come to the Capitol and testify about it. But you're exactly right. I would lean towards outside because the things that are telegraphing this is it's a public interest group. So it probably has like membership and stuff. It's a highly visible environmental project. It's this thing that's going to attract media attention and everything. So very good. 3, a business coalition wants a narrow tax change with a little public attention. Where's Trefethin? I'm going to call on you.
Limited protection, you said?
Business coalition wants a narrow tax change with little public attention.
Then they're gonna do inside.
Inside, absolutely. And it's very much for the same reason as the first one, so we're going to go on to 4. A citizen group wants to put a policy question directly on the ballot in a state. Let's go with you, sir, in the corner. Yes.
Repeat
I'm sorry?
Repeat.
Yeah. So is it inside or outside? A citizen group wants to put a policy question directly on the ballot in the state. Anybody want to help him out?
They need any type of inside or outside thing. I mean, that's pretty much talking about the legislative branch, right? So that wouldn't be something we like protest. Put a question up there, 'cause that's where you go to do it.
Yeah, this one's a little bit tricky. I agree with you. On first glance, it would appear that it would be inside, but the phrase that pays here is that they want to put it directly on the ballot. They don't want to work with the legislature. They want to go that initiative petition route to bypass the
I
legislature.
would probably say outside, where you could probably protest, just get its attention, and they would most likely make that the first thing that they address.
Exactly. So in Missouri, the way we do this is we collect signatures on petitions. You never have to step foot in the Capitol. You do your petitions, you get so many votes, it gets put on the ballot. Sweet. So the smartest groups do not use one strategy at a time. They usually mix strategies, but they're going to match the strategy to the fight. So if there's a group that is very interested in taxation, you could see how they might use different strategies depending on different things. If it's a very, very narrowly tailored thing that they're trying to get done, maybe they're going to go with an inside strategy. If they're trying to get massive reform done to, like, I don't know, change the price of groceries, maybe it's going to be an outside thing to get people riled up about it. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about how they choose each strategy. The book emphasizes the groups choose strategies based partly on their resources and partly on what they think will be most effective for their issue. Also, it's worth noting that some groups avoid heavy electioneering, while others rely more on quiet lobbying, grassroots organizing, or media work. Influence is not just about money, it also depends on things like membership size and the perception of expertise. Money matters, but strategy is not just about money. It is also about matching resources to the kind of influence you need. How much power do interest groups actually have? my notes indicate that this is kind of the myth-busting block. Our textbook warns against blanket claims that interest groups always dominate policy. It notes that influence is hard to measure because groups often lobby allies rather than enemies. Both sides are often active in the same fight, and groups may exaggerate their own influence. It also shows that outcomes often depend on whether the other side is organized too. The right question is not, do interest groups have power? Rather, the right question is, under what conditions does a group succeed? So, what affects success? Whether or not there's an organized opponent. Waymo, for example, in what they're trying to do, I think they're going to succeed because I think a lot of the Republicans are in favor of what they're working on. So they're lobbying people who are already supporting them. However, they've also got a very organized opponent in the trucking industry. The interesting thing about this legislation is, while it would provide access to robo-taxis, it's written broadly enough that it would allow autonomous semis too, eventually. And the trucking industry is very concerned about that. They think that nothing but a human truck driver is going to be capable of doing the things that need to be done to make sure that's safe. Or, to put it a different way, that's what they say in the committee meetings, but realistically, they don't want the humans to be put out of business. So they're very organized. They're putting up the best resistance I've seen to the legislation of all the different groups that have talked about it. Second, we're going to talk about the salience of the issue. Is this something that resonates? Is it something people care about? If not, it's going to be hard to get it done. We've already talked all about access and expertise. Those also factor into that, as well as resources. But then we have public opinion. Is this something that's favored or not? I would argue Waymo has a mixed bag with public opinion. Again, continuing to use that as a resource. How many people trust AI? I do and I don't, right? Like, you catch me on a good day and I'm like, AI is changing my life. You catch me on a bad day, I'm like, damn it, Siri. So it really just depends on, kind of how I'm feeling, whether or not I like it or not. But a lot of people think it would be a very scary idea to allow the robot to drive a, couple thousand pounds of metal down the road. And then finally, what's the institutional venue? As we talked about in the very beginning of class, the rules that we use to decide who wins the fight is going to have a big impact on how that fight is won or not. All right, so we talked a little bit about this framework again. When we think about an interest group strategy, there are 5 questions you can kind of go to figure out which one they should use. The first is, what is the policy goal? Second, is the issue technical or publicly visible? 3 is, does the group have expertise, money, members, or some sort of media appeal? 4 is the best strategy inside, outside, or mixed? And then 5, who is on the other side of the issue? All right, that concludes what I have to cover with you guys today. Before I hop off the video to do roll, does anybody have any questions? Thanks everybody for playing. I understand that interest groups are not the most fun subject, but I really appreciate everybody participating.